Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to go ahead and talk about something a little bit different. We did look at the semi-auto for the FR556, and that caused a lot of questions in the comment section. People said, hey, you need to go ahead and check out the AN-94, check its semi-auto, see if that does a thing, because obviously it does have its hyper burst action going on, where every time you pull the trigger, 2 bullets come out. And let's go ahead and see how that applies to the semi-auto. And there were a lot of questions about the Oden as well. One thing I did notice with my FR is that the fire rate was slightly off what I mentioned in my video, but that's what we're going to go ahead and cover today, because there was a little bit of a problem with the equation that has been fixed. I don't know why it was broken for the FR, but it was definitely off for whatever reason. I guess I was a little bit dyslexic and I put the 1 in the wrong spot, threw everything off, but we'll go ahead and talk about that. If you do enjoy the video, learn something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Let's go ahead and get into it. So when it comes to the AN, pretty much what we're checking for is if I pull the trigger, we get 2 bullets that come out really fast, and then the fire rate after that. So pretty much you hold the trigger, it kind of does its thing. If we want to see a little bit of a recoil pattern and see how that changes differently, it just goes up and then diagonally to the right. Has relatively low recoil, relatively easy to use, but that hyper burst actually speeds up the overall rate of fire if you factor in all 30 bullets. But if you try to spam it, then you end up with a little bit of a burst delay. But you'll see how different this recoil pattern is by me just spamming this. So I put it into the semi-hyper burst mode, and you'll see the recoil. It pretty much goes up. You hear a little bit of the pausing, but the rate of fire ends up being very comparable. There's probably like a 5 to 10% difference, which we'll look at in the numbers and kind of see how I tested. But you can see that this recoil pattern is pretty much straight vertical, maybe a little bit to the left, whereas this one goes up and to the right. Vertical magnitude wins if you just hold the trigger. The tapping one works because you kind of resetting that predictive recoil pattern every time you release the trigger. And that's one of the benefits of actually going in semi-auto is you get full control of the recoil. But the problem is then you have to worry about spamming this while aiming or tapping the aim, you know, and firing at the same time while worrying about your accuracy versus just holding the trigger down and letting that be an automatic hold. So that's kind of how that part works. Now let's take a look at the Oden. If I just hold the Oden, relatively slow fire rate, but this gun does pack a punch. Biggest issue with it is its small ammo capacity. You get the 20 by default, 25, and 30 if you bump it up. Not a lot. So we put that in semi-auto, and you'll see how the recoil pattern changes, and pretty much it goes a little bit different. Obviously, I started at a little bit lower spot, but it doesn't kind of have that bend. It kind of just does vertical. If you can actually spam this thing pretty good, you're not going to have a ton of recoil. It's going to be a little bit easier to manage. But the problem is generally the larger the mag, it's very hard to maintain that consistency throughout. First 10 bullets, oh, I got it. And then my finger's getting tired and then it slows down. So you kind of have that. So pretty much all I'm doing is aiming and then I pull the trigger, right? Literally on camera, so that's like there how that works. These have relatively low slow fire rates, so these trigger caps can be attained rather easily. It just gets a little bit wonky in close range engagements because then you got to be accurate while spamming. You got to have the right trigger control. So I've already gone, tested that. Let's go ahead and look at the results. So I have the markers where I start firing. You know, I have the clock at the top. Do the measurement. You can see when I start firing, and then you can see when the end of the firing happens. Then pretty much you plug it into an Excel spreadsheet. You plug in the numbers, it puts out results, and then pretty much you use those numbers to get the TTK based off how fast the weapon's going to kill, based off the damage, number of shots to kill, and where you got to hit them in the body. Let's go ahead and look at the Excel spreadsheet, which will be pretty straightforward. So it's in this video that I noticed this issue as I was going to test, because a lot of people did ask about the AN-94 and the Oden. I noticed that the numbers were coming up a little bit off when I just copy and pasted from the FR556, which I just did a video on talking about how its TTK is a little bit like crazy when you factor in this semi-auto action, but it didn't end up being the case. There was an error in that equation, which we're going to talk about really quickly. But basically what you're supposed to do is 60 seconds RPM, rounds per minute, and then you put in the time, and you're supposed to multiply that by the mag -1 because this timer starts the second the first bullet's fired. So you don't actually include the first bullet in the equation. So I had this where it was actually subtracting a second from the time. I know it sounds complicated, but for purposes of this, it basically will always make your rate of fire faster if you use this top equation versus the bottom one, which is the equation you're supposed to use to figure out your rate of fire. This caused the RPM of the FR556 to be about 20 to 30% faster than it actually was, which created this issue where the TTK looked completely broken, whereas when you actually plug it in accurately, the TTK is still really good, still competitive, but M16 AUG FFAR still completely obliterates all of the other weapons in the game. So what I did is I did the right thing with the AN and the Oden to detect that there was going to be a difference, because there are slight discrepancies of how fast you could pull the trigger, as well as having the burst. We have the hyper burst, and then we have the regular one. So this will kind of give you a good idea of how this particular thing works. I tested this for the normal AN. That means just hold the trigger, count the bullets, -1, look at the time, do the equation that I just talked about. You plug in this number in yellow, you plug in this one, this is the mag, this is the time, and it pops out the RPM. You can see that they were about a frame apart in terms of actual measurement here. So a couple frames, not a huge deal. It ends up with the fire rate of 589, 586, probably somewhere in the middle. Obviously, we're doing this at 60 frames, so there could be a little bit of frame rounding depending on what frame we actually capture it at. Just kind of how it works. When you use it in semi-auto, so we put it to the double hyper burst, you end up with a scenario where it's actually a little bit faster, but it's so minuscule. We're talking about 10 RPM. That's not even like, that's like 1 to 2% difference. Wouldn't be noticeable. But as we saw, the recoil can have a dramatic difference if you prefer to just spam it. Doesn't mean that the TTK is any better, because we're entering it with a similar rate of fire. But the big difference is the recoil may be more manageable if you're really struggling with the recoil, even though the AN typically has one of the best recoil patterns in terms of being able to control it, because it does have a slow rate of fire. It allows it to recenter a little bit better. You have a little bit more control over it. Just kind of how it goes. If you fired the 2 bullets and just kept pulling the trigger, the remaining 28 bullets come out at 568 RPM. So they are a little bit slower. If you're not even stopping to pull the trigger again, you kind of have that issue where it is just a little bit slower, but not so much that it's going to destroy it, in terms of that, because the delay is really kind of evening out. And I think that's the overall goal they were trying to accomplish here. They did not want to try and let anything be broken beyond reason. So there are some safeguards in place. Looked like the Oden, when I did this, you ended up with about a 8 to 9% slower rate of fire. And the recoil pattern, really not a huge difference. Other than it kind of took that kink out of it, because maybe it's not going up quite as fast as the other one. But if it allows you to hit your shots, theoretical TTK gets a little bit closer to the practical TTK if you're hitting your shots. But the issue with the Oden is it's far too slow, and the mag isn't quite large enough, especially when you start to deal with trios and quads. Can you do it? Yes. Is it practical? Not really, especially compared to how broken the meta currently is. So I did want to cover that, and I did want to correct that issue, because a lot of people bringing this up because people think the AN's a sleeper, Oden's sleeper. Yes, if the right weapons get nerfed and the certain weapons receive buffs in the terms of mag size for the Oden, we're going to have a very good meta where you can use a lot of stuff which has been seen in previous seasons. Even when the Kilo was broken, the Growl was broken, people are still using a bunch of weapons because they could compete with each other. Obviously, there's always going to be a meta. There's always going to be the best, and there's always going to be people that want to use that. But that doesn't mean that those are the only options. In our current meta, the gap between usable and meta is so large that you're at a disadvantage if you're not using the meta. Whereas if they nerf some of those down and everything was kind of here, but we still had the meta and they're almost touching, of course the best is still the best, but you can get away with using off meta. And that's kind of the goal that I'm hoping they take it, especially within Season 3. If there's a bunch of weapon tuning and balancing, they integrate some new stuff. We get the Psychov pistol, the CX-9, the raw LMG. We got options, right? So hopefully we'll see kind of how it goes. So hopefully you guys understood how the mistake happened and understand that I'll try to avoid that in the future. It doesn't normally happen, but I do appreciate the support on the channel. If you enjoyed the video, learned something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Appreciate all the support. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.